There was a reason the Japanese ran their supply lines after dark. Off the island of Buka, 5 Japanese warships turned for home, a successful mission behind them. At the heart of the column rode their commander, Captain Kyoto Kagawa. They'd just run a Tokyo Express mission, the night supply runs Japan used to feed its island troops. The group had come down the Solomons after midnight, the way the Tokyo Express always did, under heavy cloud, along a route that had fed Japanese island garrisons for more than a year. Tonight's run mattered more than most. Only 3 weeks before, the Americans had come ashore at Bougainville, a large island just to the south, landing Marines on its western coast. Japan's high command looked at that landing and decided it was a trick. The real American attack, they were certain, would fall to the north, so they moved to defend it. Kagawa had just finished putting nearly 1,000 soldiers ashore with their supplies to hold Buka against an attack they were sure was coming. The landing had drawn no fire. Boats in, troops out, cargo down, and the ships reformed to leave while the island was still quiet. They were not leaving empty-handed. Below the decks of the 3 transports rode 700 men, the air crews, mechanics, and ground staff who had run the Buka airfield. They were being pulled out because there was nothing left for them to run on. American bombers had cratered the ship end to end and left the hangars open to the sky. The column that carried them was built in 2 parts. Up front ran the escorts, Kagawa's own Onami and the Makinami. Fleet destroyers, each near 2,000 tons, fast, gunned, and loaded with the Type 93 torpedo the Americans called the Long Lance. Behind them came a trio of transport destroyers, the Yugiri, the Amagiri, and the Uzuki, older and lighter, and packed past capacity with troops, riding low and slow to turn. They set course for Rabaul, the great Japanese stronghold to the southwest, down the channel past Cape St. George at the foot of New Ireland, roughly 150 miles of open sea, the same water they'd crossed coming in. The dangerous stretch was the island, and the island was already dropping away behind them. With no radar, the lookout swept the night with their binoculars. The sea was empty, and it was theirs. Out in the dark west of Buka, Captain Arleigh Burke was already waiting for them on what he called, quote, an ideal night for a nice quiet torpedo attack. He'd held command of Destroyer Squadron 23, the Little Beavers, for barely a month. 5 Fletcher-class destroyers, worn to the bone by the last few weeks, were running patrols off Bougainville by night and falling back at full speed each day to refuel. The order had come on the afternoon of November 24th. American reconnaissance had flagged the Japanese run, the troops going into Buka, and the airfield men coming out. Headquarters wanted it stopped. Admiral Halsey signed the dispatch that sent Burke north, and it wasted no words. Quote, 31 knot Burke. Get athwart the Buka-Rabaul evacuation line, about 35 miles west of Buka. If no enemy contact by 0300, come south to refuel, same place. If enemy contacted, you know what to do. Headquarters had handed him a spot to wait. Burke took one look at it and decided it was too far back. The enemy would already be past that line and running for home before he ever saw them. So he pushed on, west and north, closer to the Japanese stronghold at Rabaul than any Allied warship had dared to go the whole campaign. He would not sit on the line the enemy expected him to. He would get ahead of them and take them from the one direction a column running for home would never think to watch, the front. Everything that night favored ships that did not want to be seen. Heavy overcast and rain, the same blind black weather that had cost the U.S. Navy whole columns of ships earlier in the war off Savo Island. But Burke held the one thing Kagawa did not: radar. His screens could pick out a ship miles away, long before any lookout, and the Japanese had nothing to answer it. Just past 1:30 in the morning of November 25th, he brought the squadron down to 23 knots, slow enough to flatten the wake so nothing white would give his ships away. His 5 were split into 2. Burke rode the lead group of 3 aboard his flagship, the Charles Osborne, with the Claxton and the Dyson on his flanks. The other 2 ran 5,000 yards off under his second commander. A hammer held back to swing once the first blow landed. 10 minutes later, 2 contacts bloomed on the radar. Several miles out, holding course and speed, coming on at 25 knots, straight down the channel toward home, steaming directly at a man they could not see. The enemy was exactly where he wanted them. He let them come even closer. Burke had them right where he wanted them. At 5,500 yards off the enemy's bow, he fired. One after the other, 15 torpedoes went into the water in a long ripple, then ran out toward the column, crossing the gap unseen. The first one struck the Onami square on her side. She was the flagship. Kagawa's own ship, the lead escort, the vessel running point for the entire operation, simply came apart. The warhead opened her hull, and her magazines caught and went with it, and what had been a 2,000-ton warship became a single enormous flash of orange light that threw wreckage 300 feet into the air. One moment she was steaming home. The next she was gone, and every man aboard her with her. Captain Kyoto Kagawa, the officer in command of the whole run, went down with his flagship, dead before he saw the ship that struck him, before he knew an enemy was there. The mission still had 2 hours to run. It had just lost the man in charge. The second escort, the Makinami, was hit in the same spread and blew apart amidships, fire erupting fore and aft along her length. But she did not go down. Torn open and burning, dead in the water, she stayed stubbornly on the surface, a wrecked ship still afloat in the light of the one that had vanished beside her. The 2 ships meant to guard the column were finished in under a minute. Behind them, 3 loaded transports had just watched their escorts turn into fire on the water ahead. The 3 transports saw everything, and the crews understood at once that there was no fight to make here. These were older ships, lighter, packed past capacity with troops, built to carry men, not to trade torpedoes with a destroyer squadron. So the transports did the only thing left to them, throttles wide open, helms hard over for Rabaul, and they ran. Burke had a choice to make. The Makinami still floated behind him, wrecked and burning, but not yet sunk, and a wreck this close to Rabaul might be towed in and saved by morning. Ahead of him, 3 loaded transports were opening the range and running for the stronghold. He would not let them have either one. He turned to 3 lead ships and tore off after the runners, and he handed the damaged escort to the 2 ships he had held back all night for exactly this moment. Most captains would have called it a night then and there. Burke was not most captains. Two of Burke's ships stayed back to finish what the torpedoes hadn't. Makinami was wrecked and burning, but still on the surface, and a crippled ship this near the stronghold might be towed in and salvaged before the day was out. Burke wanted her gone. One after the other, 5 torpedoes hit her, bow to stern. Yet when the smoke cleared, she remained. At last she answered. A torpedo came off her, ran true, and slammed into the side of one of the American ships. A clean hit that should have opened her to the sea. However, the warhead was a dud, allowing the American ship to keep firing. The Americans came closer than ever and switched to guns, 5-inch shells hammering her at a few hundred yards, until finally the Makinami rolled over and went under. With the last of her gone beneath the surface, the crew that had finished her keyed the radio to Burke and reported it in 6 flat words, quote, "One more rising sun has set." Both escorts were gone now, and the officer who had led them went down with the first of them. By the count of almost any night action in this war, this was the moment it ended. The trap had sprung, the guards were sunk, and the survivors would scatter into the rain and slip away, while the gunfire died behind them. Burke had other plans. The transports had a head start, and every minute carried them closer to the guns of Rabaul. The surprise was spent. What had begun as a silent ambush in the rain had become a straight, stern chase across open sea, in the blind, with the enemy running for his life. The transports had close to 7 miles on Burke when they broke, but they were the slower ships now, loaded heavily and sitting low, packed with men. Burke's 3 were lighter, faster, built for exactly this. The gap began to close, foot by foot, minute by minute. Then Burke had a hunch. Japanese destroyers, running for their lives, would fire torpedoes back down their own wake at whatever was behind them. The long lance ran for miles. If they had fired, it would have been in the water already. The order went out. 45 degrees right. Hold a minute. Come back. 3 ships heeled over together, ran the new heading for 1 minute, and swung back onto the chase. A single step off the line, and they'd been holding dead straight. A minute later, the sea came apart behind them. 3 heavy explosions walked up the wake, one after another, right where the column had just been. They were long lances, fired blind down the track, running the exact line Burke's ships had ridden a minute before. They found churning water and an empty sea. For one frozen instant, every man on every ship had the same thought, that the ship beside him had just taken a torpedo. None of them had. 3 sets of wakes still cut the water ahead. Burke had survived the worst the enemy could throw back at him. Now he went after them for good. The transports were pulling away, and Burke could see the one way to catch them. It was the last thing he wanted to do. They were faster than loaded ships had any right to be, and Burke needed his guns on them. The problem was that using his guns the right way meant turning broadside, swinging sideways so every mount could fire. The moment he turned, he would lose speed, and the enemy would stretch the range back out and slip away. Turn wrong, and it was worse. A sharp enemy could cross ahead of him and bring every gun to bear across his bow, while he answered with almost nothing. Every destroyer captain feared that. Burke feared it that night. So he made the call a hunter makes. As Burke himself said, quote, "A stern chase is a long chase." He held his bow on the enemy, kept every knot he had, and fired only the guns that could shoot straight ahead. The forward mounts, and nothing else. Half his firepower was traded away for speed, and the men who paid for it were his own. On the Charles Osborne, one gun sat high in the bow, and the second sat right behind and below it. Its crew closed inside an armored mount. Each time the high gun fired over the bow, the blast rolled back and broke over that lower crew, a wall of pressure, flame, and burnt powder full in the face. One salvo came down so hard it tore the hatch clean off its mount, and after that, they had nothing over them at all. Every shot after poured straight down on the men inside. They kept loading and kept firing, eyes streaming, ears ringing, throats raw with cordite, hands going numb on the shells as the gases rolled over them, salvo after salvo. One by one, they began to fold, heads swimming, knees buckling, men sliding to the deck, unconscious from the fumes of their own ship's guns. And the mount kept firing. Whoever could still stand stepped over the ones who could not, took their place, and fed the next round into the breach. The forward guns never stopped. A little after 2 in the morning, Burke judged the range close enough, 8,000 yards, and opened up. Now both sides were shooting. The transports threw their helms around, changing course, firing back down the range, and the night filled with muzzle flashes and falling water. Burke would not run a straight line into that. He had his ship's fishtail as they came, weaving inside a 30-degree spread, never holding a heading long enough for an enemy gunner to settle on them. The Japanese gunners were good, and they were finding the range. Salvos came down tight, near misses walking in close enough to put 2 inches of seawater on the Claxton's bridge. Shells that missed by a few feet, but somehow none of them landed. The 3 transports stopped running as one and split. One broke hard to the north, peeling away on her own heading, while the other two held west, racing on separate tracks for the mouth of St. George Channel and the open water that led home. 3 targets, 3 directions opening up on the radar. Burke could not have all of them. The moment they fanned out, some of them were going to live. He made the cut fast. He threw one ship after a westbound runner to harry her and keep her honest, and swung the rest of his force north, onto the one that had broken off alone, because she read as the largest target on the screen, Yugiri. This was the hunt the captain had wanted all night, and it showed. Burke ran her down and poured fire into her. Shell after shell, the forward mounts hammering one hull, the crews working blind in the smoke, and for a long stretch, it did nothing at all. Yugiri took it and kept going. Smoke lay thick and low around her, screening her hull, swallowing Burke's ships, making every hit impossible to read. The range kept falling. The guns kept working, and somewhere in that wall of fire, the shells started to land. As Charles Osborne bore down on the Yugiri, her forward guns flashing, the light of every salvo lit the cartoon painted on the flagship's stack, the squadron's own little Beaver, flaring out with each shot. And Burke, a Colorado man at heart, with the enemy finally under his guns, keyed the radio and let out, quote, "Kamakaya yippee." Then the Yugiri came apart. The shells walked the length of her, and the explosions tore her open, fire climbing out of every wound. She had one move left. She emptied her torpedo tubes. The last spread flung across the water, and every fish ran wide into nothing. Steering shot away, speed bleeding out, she fell off into a slow circle, turning helplessly on the surface with her fires reaching higher. The chase was over. The finish was not. Burke closed on the circling wreck and ended her the way the night had begun, with torpedoes. A little after 3 a.m, Yugiri rolled over and was gone. 3 ships down. Both escorts, and the largest of the transports, were on the bottom now, and the commander had gone down with the first of them. The last 2 got away. They ran west into the channel, hit and burning, but still making way, until the distance finally closed over them. Hours later, a night flyer would report a ship burning and blowing apart 60 miles out, far across open water, almost certainly one of the 2 that had run, ending alone in the sea, with no one left to record her name. Even the ones that lived did not all live whole. The sweep was done. 5 Japanese ships had started down that channel for home. 3 of them were on the bottom now, or burning toward it. Through it all, Burke's 5 ships and the men inside them had paid nothing for them. A close-range night fight against the best torpedo either navy had, and his squadron sailed out of it without a scratch or a single casualty. With the sun coming out by the second, a little past 4 a.m, Burke knew he had to leave. He'd chased the last 2 transports as far as he dared, up toward St. George Channel, and water he could not follow them into. Now dawn was coming, the one enemy Burke could not outturn, and his 5 ships were deep in the worst corner of the Pacific, low on fuel, far from home, and sitting right under Rabaul, the great Japanese stronghold, where hundreds of bombers and fighters waited within easy reach. The dark that had hidden them all night was bleeding away. Just past 4 a.m, he formed the squadron up and turned south to run for it, every man at his station watching the gray come up, waiting for the sky to fill with planes. Then the planes came. Far off at first, climbing out of the south, a swarm of them flew low over the water, growing as they closed. Every eye in the squadron locked on the shapes, every gun crew braced, every man waiting for them to resolve into the thing he had dreaded all night. Twin booms, long straight wings, a white star on each one. They were not Japanese. These were P-38 Lightnings, American fighters sent up from the south to cover the run home, and as the markings came clear, the dread broke all across the squadron and washed out into relief. Burke had spent the whole night braced to fight his way out under a sky full of enemies. Instead, he looked up at the friendly ones. According to him, quote, "Never has the white star on a wing meant so much to tired sailors as the one on those lightnings." The reason nothing had come for them was almost unbelievable. On the fields around Rabaul that morning sat 58 bombers and 145 fighters, more than enough to have ended Destroyer Squadron 23 in an hour. They never found it. They simply did not know where Burke was and could not locate him in time. And the whole squadron sailed out of the trap untouched, while the force that could have destroyed it sat on the ground and never lifted off. As the ships came south into safer water, the same requests started coming into the flagship from one destroyer after another, until Burke passed it up the line himself, quote, "Please arrange Thanksgiving services for all hands on arrival." Upon arrival at base, the brave men who'd just taken down 3 ships in a single night sat down for a full, proper meal, with much to be thankful for. By the only measure they had set for that night, the Japanese could call the run a success too. Every one of the 920 soldiers was ashore on Buka. Every one of the 700 airfield men had been carried off. Both halves of the mission were finished before Burke ever fired a torpedo. It cost them 3 warships and 647 men. Burke had sunk all 3 and lost nothing. Not one ship, not one sailor. None of it mattered. Buka was never attacked. It was never going to be. The island had been reinforced against an invasion that existed only in the minds of the men who ordered the run. The soldiers held a beach that no one was coming to. In the end, the Battle of Cape St. George was such a devastating loss, the Tokyo Express never ran again. Japan won this battle. It was the last one they would ever win.